Hey everybody, it's Chloe Thistleverse here, and today I'm going to be doing recommendations for the Black SFFathon. Today's video is going to be for the prompt author you've never read before. Obviously, I can't see on your TBR. I don't know what books you have or have not read in the past, and so I'm just going to highlight some authors who I think don't get a lot of hype on BookTube, and so there's a decent chance that if you're watching, you have not read these books, but you should change that and read them. So I'm going to do a few books in general, just like novels, novellas, and then I'm going to recommend 3 books from the Black SFFathon free short story list. These stories are released by the magazines that publish them, and so I will have their links in the description box below for you to access. So now let's get into the recommendations. So first one I'd recommend is A Spectral Hue by Craig Lawrence Gidney. This is about a fictional town, Shimmer, Maryland, that is haunted by a very artistic ghost. She possesses African-American folk artists and compels them to make art using the color purple and showing varying images of the marsh of Shimmer. It's about a grad student who comes to investigate the folk art coming out of this town and the current effects of the ghost on Shimmer and how he kind of gets drawn into the web of its activities. So this book is a predominantly queer cast. There are, I believe, like 4 narrating characters, and of them 2 or 3 are queer. This was a book that I really enjoyed because of the writing style. I think Gidney writes very beautiful sentences. I also really enjoyed the exploration of the relationship between an artist and their art. There is like a horrific aspect to the ghost's possession. It can cause the people it possesses to sabotage their mental health, their physical health, their families. But there's also like a beauty and like an otherworldly magic in the art that it creates. And also like the ghost is kind of an artist. It often appears in the work that it compels. And so there's kind of a way that this art allows the people it possesses to see like a whole new world. And also the ghost is like kind of exploring itself through the art that it makes people create. I just found this book so fascinating. I hosted a book discussion of it for the Solar Powered Afrofuturism Slow Reading Group, which is a virtual book club that's primarily on Facebook. I'll include the link in the description box below. And we had a great discussion. There's just like so much going on. Questions about like gatekeeping and academia and art, the right of artists to their work. What happens to artists' work after they die? What is the relationship between the dead and the living? So I really enjoyed this book, highly recommend it. I think it's a great read. Next one I'd recommend is Sorcerer of the Wild Deeps by Kai Ashanti Wilson. This is another fantasy novella, adult fantasy novella, about this man who's descended from the gods, and he kind of travels around with this like caravan of traders. He's like the basically securities. He protects them from robbers, wild animals. They have to cross through one particularly tricky patch of terrain where it's kind of like a time forest in a way. Like there's like all these different worlds and time periods like on different sides of the path. And there's like a horrific giant like wildcat prowling through this time forest and like picking people off. And so it's about this man's romantic feelings for another man in the caravan, and also him trying to figure out how he's going to best this threat to their troop. In general, Kai Ashanti Wilson's language is very flowery, but I also really enjoy it. I also enjoy his use of language in these like secondary worlds because it's like a completely new kingdom, a completely new world, but people still speak African American vernacular English. And Wilson's writing is very emotional and very emotive. A lot of it will just wring your heart. And then last of the novel/novella recommendations is Juniper Leaves, The Otherworldly Tale of a Lonesome Magical Girl by Jazz Joyner. So this is like a young adult fantasy about a black teenager, Juniper, who is going with her father to like, I think they're in North Carolina, to do some botany research. And she's kind of bummed out because like, you know, she has better things to do than be in North Carolina. They're staying with the family with like a girl cousin who she doesn't particularly like. And her grandma, who's her best friend, has just died. And so she has a lot of stuff going on in her life. But there's a cute girl in the town, so maybe it's not all bad. And also she finds a portal to a magical world where they tell her that she is like, comes from a long lines of defenders of this world, and there's a new threat on the horizon, and it's up to her to best it. So I enjoyed this book because the main character is like very into like science and that was something that I related to and enjoyed. I also liked, that it's kind of like in her family, like her dad's also like really into the science of plants. That's also something that I found very interesting. I liked the whimsy of the magical world and sort of like the creepy stakes once the evil forces start to like infringe on Juniper's world. This is a story about growing up and finding yourself. Juniper's kind of struggling with fitting in, being comfortable with who she is. And it's about her coming into her own and also her developing a closer bond with her cousin. So in terms of the short story recommendations for this prompt, I realized that most of my audience reads like novels or novellas, and so I just recommended kind of like a grab bag of authors who have not released a novel or novella. So first up is Evo Landing by Jonathan Kincaid. This was published in Anathema magazine. This is a story about a couple whose car breaks down at the side of the road. One of the guys decides to call a tow truck, and then his boyfriend is kind of bored and he decides to wander the area while they're waiting for the tow truck to come. And while he's wandering around, he finds like this old broken down marker which has some text on it which doesn't quite explain the full history because it's so weathered, but from reading the context clues, readers are to understand that they've kind of broken down at the site of a slave rebellion of the Evo Landing and what that might mean for the restless spirits who rise out of the ground and start to chase him. It's a horror story where the protagonist is kind of forced to empathize with the monsters pursuing him and question, are they monsters? And also struggle with what that means for his life in the aftermath of what they've done. It's a very compelling story. And then my next recommendation would be An Island in His Splendor by Christopher Caldwell. This is a piece of flash fiction published in Baffling magazine. It's about a man who has a certain amount of wishes from a giant magical fish. He has had his heart broken recently, so he makes a very big wish that the fish doesn't know if it really wants to grant or not. I feel like it's been a while since I've read a story about, supernatural being that can grant wishes where they're kind of actually concerned about the well-being of the person that they're granting the wishes for. I enjoyed the fish's take on the wish. I would also recommend Yam Wine Nectar by L.P. Kindred. This was published in Prismatica magazine. It's a take on the short story Those Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin. I don't know if I can say much more than that. For those who haven't read the original story, I have not read it at this point, but it's about what are people willing to pay to live in a utopia? What are they willing to sacrifice? And, if the sacrifice is made, can it really be called a utopia? I really enjoyed, the descriptions of the festival in this story and the varieties of food. Since this was my introduction to the story, this moral conundrum, it was, really, it really grabbed me. And if you're interested in hearing more about this short story, I interviewed the author L.P. Kindred on my channel earlier this year. I will link that in the description box below. And then my last short story recommendation would be All Dragons Claim the Sky by Jen Brown. This was published in Podcastle, and it's about a young woman. She lives in a magical kingdom, and she has the ability of coif magic, so she can manipulate hair and grant wishes and work magic on the person's life of whoever's hair she does. And she wants to go to this fancy university in the kingdom's capital, and her mom's very against it. The random berserker kind of wanders into the inn, and she wants them to work some hair magic for her to help her win this upcoming tournament. And she doesn't have enough money for the magic, so protagonist's mom kicks her out. The protagonist decides that this girl is probably her best bet to get to the capital, so they team up and they go to the capital, and the capital ends up not being what it seems for the both of them. I liked the magic system in this one. I hadn't really seen hair magic done before. I thought that was very creative. I liked how gruesome it could get and how creative you have to be to use and manipulate it to the best of your abilities. I like the relationships between the characters. There's sort of a romance going between the mage and the berserker. They have sort of a emotional kinship with dragons who are disappearing from the land, which becomes very important to the story. And I also interviewed this author, so I'll link that in the description box as well. So those are all my recommendations for author you've never read before. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching. I'm going to have up the recommendations for features, rock or gem shortly. So take care, everyone. Happy reading. Goodbye.